All right, we're on and it's official. So we'll go ahead and get started today. Well, again, I think I know most of you, but if not, I'm Joy Briscoe, and in this capacity, I'm the executive director for One Cedar Valley, and I am so excited to be here today as we get to have a conversation with Dr. Marvin DeJear. And I earlier joked, but it actually is true. He is the Marvin DeJear who has done so much across the state for economic inclusion. During my time at 24/7 Black, I'll never forget that Marvin and some of his team and people he was connected to actually had written a grant to support our work, right? And having that foresight to think on a statewide level and how only they can support in Des Moines, but beyond that too. And so I'm so excited to actually have Marvin here today. He actually was the founding consultant for One Cedar Valley as well, and just all of the things. And so without further ado, Marvin, we're going to go ahead and launch in our conversation and maybe start by having you kind of introduce yourself and just share a little. People are going to see your magic in a minute, but just go ahead and share a little bit with our audience today.
All right. Well, thank you, Joy, and thank you, everybody, for taking the time to join us today. Again, I'm Dr. Marvin DeJear. I'm currently the inaugural Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for the Greater Des Moines Partnership. We are the regional chamber, and we have currently 11 counties under us that we serve. We also have 25 affiliate chambers now that actually work with us. And through that, we have a dual membership. So that allows us to where we have over 6,600 members within our chamber, really elevating us to be one of the top chambers in the country as far as size and just an influence. And we also have one of the largest policy fly-ins that we do to DC from that space, where we have about 170 to 180 individuals we fly out there on an annual basis as well to advocate in policy-wise.
I was gonna say, I love that. And how do we get on one of those flights? Like, that's pretty awesome.
It's an annual trip. Usually we do it around April or May. So definitely can look out, keep you informed around that too, Joy. So when we have the next one, I can definitely let you all know as well. So
perfect.
Me too. I want to go.
This group, I think it's safe to say this is a group that wants to go. So,
understandable.
Well, Marvin, you also are the inaugural Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer for
Yes.
the partnership. So can you talk a little bit about how that position came to be? Because I believe you were there prior to having this role, and then kind of what are some of your responsibilities in that role?
Yes, Joy. So that, kind of speaking to how this all started for me and my journey here at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, I was originally hired to be the Senior VP of Talent Development for the region. Done a lot of work previously at DMAC and started up what some of you may be aware of, the Evelyn K. Davis Center for Working Families. So I started that in 2012 and really had been doing a lot of work for the state and through the region, really, within that space. And so the partnership recruited me over to the partnership. And so I started here in January of 21. It was still Zoom world. I really didn't even get to meet the entire team and the entire team until even August of 21. So it was a different place, a different start. And under that, originally, within that area of work within the talent development, I had basically all your workforce K through 16, just really working with post-secondary and such as far as the education side of things. We also had attraction and retention, just trying to figure out ways to recruit people to the region, but also keeping them here once they got. And then also diversity, equity, and inclusion was originally under my umbrella of work within those spaces. So I had all those three areas of work when I first joined. And really at that time, I had a director of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so me and her really agreed upon the fact that diversity, equity, inclusion did not need any longer to be tucked under talent. It needed to be out on its own standalone, where one, we internally could focus on what we need to do internally for diversity and inclusion, but also being very clear as for our business members and investors where they can go to and have, if they have questions or need advice around diversity, equity, and inclusion, that that's very clearly defined where they can go and have that contact person. So our leadership listened. And as we kind of went through some transitions internally with some of the ways we were doing business, kind of going through the EOS system, that entrepreneurial operating system, we had a chance to rethink things and really ask ourselves, how do we want to make the best impact in the region? And so the decision was made then to separate diversity and inclusion out. And we went around a little bit about it. If I'm honest, it wasn't like I was the one saying it had to be me by any means. I was perfectly fine in talent. I've been doing talent for a long time. So yeah, and I do diversity and inclusion in just what I do every day. I didn't necessarily need a title to do the work that I do and be as passionate about it by any means. So but they came and they approached me about it. And so understanding that this was something new for the organization, and just the impact it could have on the region itself and even the state, I decided to do it. And so I jumped in. It's actually almost been about a year now. I've only been in this role just almost a year. And so, and within that, though, I also was clear about I need help. I mean, I can't do this by myself. So I made sure within that arrangement that I had at least one full-time staff member to be able to help me. And so I actually just hired my new program, diversity, equity, inclusion manager, that'll be working with me day to day and making sure we move this mission across the region as well. So really, when you asked what's one of the first things I did, Joy,
Yes.
was to help get this position created.
Nice. I love that too. And I love that from the inception, you spoke to like, you can't do it by yourself, right? Like two things. And I saw Anthony put something in the chat of a lot of times DEI, immediately people will put it under HR. And I think it works when, and I'm gonna do some call outs. Like if you have you in an HR position, I know Kyle Rowe has done something, you know what I mean? It works when that person, they're about that work. But what happens when that person leaves, then your spin oftentimes on the focus on DEI can change, right? And we've seen that in organizations before. So I like that call out was that, nope, we need to make it its own separate thing at that point. So when you go to work and you switch titles on day one, or at least the first 3 months, acknowledging that you're still in the first year, what's been some of the first priorities that you set for this role?
So really, one of the things that we're working on is just really making sure that our internal diversity and inclusion for the Greater Moines Partnership is where we want it to be. And really just making sure that we start to really focus on building a team that's reflective of the region. As you all, the chamber world is no different than some of the other career pathways. It's not traditionally been a space where diverse Black and Brown candidates, for example, may work and thrive in the chamber world, right? It's even just, it's an evolution within itself. And so really just trying to make sure we are reflective of the region. And then also, we've been doing a lot of work in inclusion, I should say, from the partnership standpoint. And so I actually was on what we have as our inclusion council prior to me joining. So I was already very aware of a lot of the programming that we have been doing consistently through the partnership. So really just looking at things we could do new. Recently just partnered with Come and Go and Principal and Wells Fargo and some others to bring Brianna Scurry to the area. She was the goalie on the U.S. Women's National the gold medal team. And so, and she's part of the LGBT community. And so she came and we put enough money together to where we actually came and had her here for like an entire weekend. So she came on Thursday and stayed through Saturday. We really had a lot of community and regional events. So that's one of the things I have been doing since we started this. What can we do new? What can we do different? But also really looking at what can we do to make sure that diversity, equity, inclusion is something that is recognized and being held accountable for the region. So what we've been working on too, I was a part of a group that we had started called the DSM for Equity Collective. And so this was some of the work that I had actually started pushing before I became a part of the partnership, was to really think about how do we create some equity indicators for the region. And so that's something that we're working on now, is really trying to create and launch some equity indicators to where the region as a whole can see where we are and where we need to thrive and what we need to work on is really trying to move forward and make sure this is truly an equitable region for everybody in the future. So those are just a couple of examples. Just trying to find new wrinkles of programming. Really been working a lot, heavy lifting on and trying to get these equity indicators out and really just trying to define this role because it's new, right? So I that's the thing, Joy. I got a blank canvas in a lot of areas here. I can kind of still kind of build this plane as I'm flying it. So almost sometimes.
And that, you know what, I've learned that like some people, which I feel like you are a person that you kind of thrive in those environments of like being able to build, plan as you fly. How do you even try to determine what the first priorities are? Because like when you think about it, you can come at DEIB work in so many different angles. Like you can talk about it from people with different abilities, LGBTQI plus, people of color. And so how have you started to actually build what some of your priorities are going to look like as you move forward? Or I'm sure since you just hired somebody, you got to give that person what you guys' priorities are. And so how have you started to work on what that is?
Well, you know, honestly, and I think, and I hope this is something for everybody to always remember, you've got to start with your leadership at the top. You really have to understand where your leadership is at and where do they want to go and understand their why. And that helps you start to set the priorities, right? Because at the end of the day, I could go out to Joy and say, we need to do X, Y, Z, but if I don't have the support of my leadership to help move and drive this initiative across the space, it doesn't matter. So that's where I started at. You know, we're currently in transition. We actually have a new president now, but previous president Jay Byers and our new president Tiffany Tashek, they both I used to sit with them intensely about what is their why and why are we doing this, even before I took the role, right? That's something I had to be clear about from the beginning, because I think there's still that stigma around diversity, equity, and inclusion positions, right? And so you have to be honest about that. And some of us that have been in these spaces before, we know a lot of times when things start to tighten up, sometimes those are the first positions to go, right? And those things are real. And so even as there's been recent articles even about how since 2020, how much has changed in diversity, equity, and inclusion roles around the country, who's actually in charge of those positions, who's holding those positions, who's being let go in those positions. So you have to start with leadership. I can't stress that enough. If you understand how I set my priorities, I set it off knowing exactly that I had leadership and even some of the board behind this initiative. So, and that's where we started it. Like I said, that's why we started internally and really have been working and making sure we fine tune what we're doing internally and actually practicing what I'm out here talking about to everybody else. If we're not doing it internally, I can't honestly just sit there and look at somebody and say, hey, you need to do this, knowing good well that, hey, we're not even doing it ourselves. So that's where I started it, Joy. That was my priority. Make sure that what we do internally is truly reflective of what I'm out here telling people to do on an external level.
Okay, I'm going to put a pin in something that you said, because you said you had leadership support and you said, and some of the board, which brings me to believe.
I went and talked to like the board chair and people like that. So it wasn't that there was not any support from the board, but it was more, I wanted to make sure with board leadership that they were on board. Yes. Perfect.
But I would imagine, like you spoke to though, that stigma with DEIB work, right? Yes. I'm sure you've run into some resistance. How have you dealt with that when it comes to the resistance, right? Is there an example you can share? Again, no names, because we're all friends here. But but something that maybe somebody was reluctant to kind of do the lean in. How did you deal with that, and what was some of the outcome behind it? Right.
So Joy, this it's a good question. I think if we're honest about it, there's resistance around you at all times when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So it's not just an incident or a one-time deal. I approach it from the space that I'm here to build relationships with people, and really that's how you move a lot of this. I could do presentations, tell you best practices, take these workshops around unconscious biases, microaggressions, all these different things that I could have you go and learn and watch. But really it's about how much you know people and you get to to talk to people and you get them to see that, hey, there may be something else to think about as I make these decisions. Because what I've learned is I'm not going to change everybody's mind. Might not even change any of their minds. But what I can do is give you enough tools and information to help you make a better informed decision. Because at the end of the day, if you're not making the best informed decision, you're not making the decision that's probably going to be as inclusive as we need it to be to better improve the region and the situations. So I take it more from an approach of meeting people where they're at, whether this is something new to them just as recent as 2020, or maybe they've been fighting this for 20, 30 years and just trying to figure out how to keep going and have the energy even to keep pushing through. And so there in itself is where I really just kind of ask some initial questions like I'm getting to know anybody, because that helps me inform my next steps within that conversation. Just simply as from where they're from, where did they grow up at? Have they left Iowa? Are they from Iowa, right? Like, did you come back? Did you stay? Did you just move from a smaller town to the larger town? You know, those are the kind of things you have to really understand when you start talking about diversity and inclusion, because unfortunately, that's where you can start to understand maybe some of the misinformation, misunderstandings they may have, or lack of exposure. Because let's be honest, I realized being here in Iowa long enough that Black History Month is something that wasn't even really taught very, very much around a majority of the counties in Iowa, right? So you have to understand that even when you start to have conversations with folks, their exposure to other cultures has been limited in some spaces and places. And so you have to meet them where they're at. Doesn't mean that they're bad people or they're just because they don't know. Because I use it as an example, Joy. I'm from Oklahoma originally. And one of the things that came out in 2020 was, a lot of people started to learn about Tulsa and Black Wall Street and the Tulsa Greenwood Massacre, right? And then when I realized that not everybody knew what that was about, it made me wake up and really look at the reality of it. I'm from Oklahoma. They didn't teach us about that in history class when I was growing up. The only reason I knew about it is because my grandfather taught me about it. No different than I can't expect people in Iowa, Minnesota, Wisconsin, the Midwest to know about it. If they're not even teaching us about it, then they're definitely not teaching it up here. And then there's so many examples of other things around history and other concepts. Even when you say just the word 1619 project, people cringe, right? So you have to really understand where people are at and try to meet them there before you can even start to build that foundation and conversation to get them to be able to be receptive to the information I need them to be incorporating into their decision processes, if that makes sense.
It definitely does. It definitely does. And so in the way that you address it, where you actually meet people where they're at, you're
Yes.
not necessarily just talking at them, but you're more so talking with them to create relationship that
Yes.
really can move to transformation. Can you share with us like a time where that you were successful in that, right? Like there was a time whether it was an initiative. So like I know sometimes some of the work, you already know, Mark, I'm a talent girl too. I'm a talent acquisition girl through and through. And so same thing, like there's this intersection of DEI work that comes with if you're truly doing talent acquisition, which also leans into economic inclusion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so where's there been a time when you were kind of communicating that message and maybe there was somebody that was resistant about an initiative you were working on? Like I even think of your work at the Evelyn K. Davis Center, right? Like a lot of that is based off of some of these conversations we're having, but it's contributing to the broader context of the workforce and everything in that community. And so can you talk about maybe even how you started that and how you shaped that out to get people to kind of buy in?
So I'm put on a different hat. So as you talked about when we wrote that grant to help even with 24/7 Black. So that's some work I do. I'm a part of the Directors Council. And so when we came out with the first One Economy report to state of Black Polk County that highlighted the disparities of any person of the African diaspora versus the majority of the county, there was a lot of pushback to that because we gave them a very detailed data field, mixed methods, quantitative, qualitative, gave them stories and hard numbers that was hard to deny and hard to accept when they started to really read it and understand what the report was saying. And we took that on the tour. I mean, I can't tell you, we put that first report out in 2017. It took about 3-4 years before it became really stamped and approved, and people started to really recognize it as something real. It wasn't an overnight success story. When we put it out in 2017, like, oh, this is great. We're taking this and running with it. No, it took effort. We had to go around and go organization by organization, company by company, Rotary group by Rotary group, and really have these conversations. My wife and our board chair, Terry Caldwell Johnson, I know for a fact they had over like 100 meetings during the pandemic, most likely just doing Zoom after Zoom, meeting after meeting, just really pushing it. But it helped lay the foundation to where it became accepted. And now it's used in a lot of meetings across the state. But also it helped lay the ground for when we came out with the secondary report with the One Economy Blueprint for Action. And so these things, it takes time. And you just have to keep pushing through it, regardless, because when we heard the things, oh, this data is old, this data does not relevant, this doesn't match us. You hear all these things, but we're using the same census data that you make your reports from. It's no different than the reports that are coming out published by anybody else. So that's just an example of where you have to, you got to keep pushing through it. You got to keep going around, keep having the conversations, and you keep making the rounds to where then, like, now it's accepted. Like, people are actually waiting and anticipating for us to come out with the next report now, right? We went from the first report to where it was questionable to now we're moving into our third report, and they're waiting for it. They want to see it, right? So that's just part of that. That's an example of, regardless of when you come out with some things, you're always going to have resistance, Joy. This work, here we are in 2023, and diversity, equity, inclusion is still a conversation of why are we still having to have this conversation? We could approach it from that. Why do we still have to have the conversation around diversity, equity, inclusion? And that's part of it. It's been an evolution since equal opportunity employment. This is the evolution where we are to now, right? Even diversity, equity, inclusion didn't start off as diversity, equity, inclusion. It started off as diversity. Right. And then it was diversity and inclusion. And then now the equity part is in. And like you talked about earlier, belonging. Some people may say accessibility. There's different acronyms now that continue to grow on top of diversity. Right. So this is a continuous journey that doesn't stop. And it's something that we just have to know that every step of the way, there may be some that resist it, but we have to keep moving forward, regardless of what that resistance looks like. You can't stop.
Awesome. No, that's so true. I love that you're setting an expectation. Sharina, who's traveling, she's not on here, but she often even talks about, like, it's really a continuum, right? Like it doesn't stop. Like, you'll forever be educating yourself. And that's all of us. We did something last week to kick off Juneteenth, and I was sharing with the people that were there my own journey with, like, I have a trans daughter, and I didn't know that much about it, and as I'm learning, I reached out to my daughter and I'm like, I apologize, because I know I probably gave you harm as a part of me being ignorant and not knowing. And then even furthermore, when I first, I'm an Iowa girl, so that wasn't something that we were taught to even lean into, right? And so initially, when my child is having their experience, here I am going like, well, you just need to adapt to me and what we expect and all of these things. And so it's been interesting to kind of incorporate my own learning and my own growth into the work that we're doing, because it's something that all of us have to continuously stretch ourselves about. Anthony's on here, he's my partner, and I've talked about growing up in a patriarchy, right? And so what that does to our ideas of, behind women in work and women in leaderships, and how oftentimes you have to unpack that constantly, like all of us. And so Anthony put a question in the chat too, and he asked about, like, what are some of the tools that you use to do that work? And then he has a third one too. And in a few minutes, I'm going to open up for more questions as well. But he asked about, like, when you say this, like, what are some of the tools and things that you use?
So some of it is around just having initial conversations with folks. I may have a CEO or a senior administrator reach out to me and just have an initial conversation about what they could do. And so I start there. And then I'm very realistic with folks when I talk about, again, that the why, making sure people understand why they're actually doing this and understanding it and being real about it. You don't have to sugarcoat it with me. When they talk to me, I say, you don't have to try to mix words and try to even be politically correct about it, but just let's talk about really what you want. And so I've had success from just being available. I've had CEOs reach out to me and just want to have a conversation about things that they may not have been comfortable enough to talk about to others, but they'll reach out and have a conversation, right? So start there. We'll come in. So that's one of the things you asked about it. So we actually offer our investors and members a free one-on-one consultation. So I'll offer it for free. I'll come out and have that initial conversation with them of trying to at least help them figure out what direction to go if they're not really clear on where to go. So we start there. Then I'll come in sometimes and do a DEI one-on-one conversation and really just break down what is diversity, equity, inclusion. And I say that because I want people to always, it's almost even better to say it versus saying DEI, because there's in this hypertension, as you talked about, certain acronyms get walls raised immediately. You say DEI, CRT, all these different acronyms that have become so polarized. It's almost better to just say diversity, equity, inclusion, say what it is. And you get further in that way sometimes even than just saying DEI. Because some people still don't, you'd be surprised how many people don't really even know what DEI means. So it's still an acronym that is not fully recognized throughout the nation, throughout the world. It's still a new space to some people. So you have to remind yourself of that. And I'm not talking about just the majority of folks. We're talking about Black and brown people that don't know what DEI means when you start to talk to some people. So you have to always step back and really be open and understanding. You just can't assume people know what you assume them to know. It's not real. You have to always know that you have to give people that, I guess you could say, that grace to know that they may just not know. There's truly a lot of people that just have no context or understanding what his history has looked like in America as far as when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and just even getting past what this current iteration of things. So from a political standpoint, I try not to really dive into politics. That's not my forte. I got my other half. She does a lot more of the politics push, but even then, I approach it from a standpoint. If I'm being honest, as a Black man in America, politics has never really mattered who's been in charge when it comes to me. I've been the subject of intense scrutiny my whole life. When I was coming up, there was a Democrat in charge, and I was labeled as a super predator. So it didn't matter. So it doesn't matter who's in charge in politics. To me, it's a matter of, does that person have the willingness and the understanding or insights even to really make inclusive decisions, regardless of party, because it hasn't mattered which party's been in charge for a lot of the success, a lot of what Black and brown people are enduring and facing in this country. So you have to not get caught up far left, far right. You got to really approach this as that person, as your elected official. Have you had a conversation with them and have that talk? Because that's where you start to see who's for you, who's not, but also how to approach it if they're not. But you don't know, you can't, I don't go off of if they're a D or an R or even an I. That doesn't matter to me. It never has, because you miss things when you start to get caught up on parties. Because it's just another, to me, political parties are just another form of division. And we have enough division already. So for that point for me, I don't really worry about who I'm talking to, whether it's a Democrat, Republican, or independent. I'm looking at what are you doing in your decision-making process, and are you making decisions that truly impact everybody in this space, first and foremost.
You know what? That is so interesting, and I think we've allowed that to become more of the conversation, and we've allowed it in such a way that, like we're here because we're economic inclusion, right? Like, how are we making sure everybody is having a chance to thrive economically? And that doesn't really lead with, like you said, political party or things of that nature. And I think that kind of what you're talking about, it getting back to like, let's asking, how are you doing what's best for the people that you're supposed to represent, right? And when you get to that, that can help get to some of the solutions and some of the around some of the work we need to, and then also even unpacking, much like what you said, like this, what's going on in education right now. Half the time I truly believe that people don't understand. They're just going off of, this is what my friend who happens to be under the same,
Sound bites and snippets is what a lot
yeah,
of people are operating off of. You'd be
not
surprised.
knowing like, oh, well, I support veterans. Well, veteran services typically fall under your DEI departments, diversity, equity, inclusion. Let me say it out, Marvin, you're right.
Yes, yes,
When you're on a
yes.
campus, your veterans typically fall under diversity, equity, inclusion. So most people would say, well, no, I'm always going to support veterans, right? Well,
Right.
that's a part of that. Or how do you feel about women or whatever have you? And so I do think we have to get back to this more of a simple point of like actually defining what it is we're actually talking about, and then making other people, because if you're making decisions on my behalf, my expectation is that you are informed.
Right.
But we have to get back to a point that we can do that. And so even thinking about that conversation from your lens, being in Des Moines, having multiple chambers under you, how do you take the efforts that you're working on and make them lean towards impacting economic inclusion?
Some of it we do through what we roll out ourselves from the organization. Just last year we had a pilot with our downtown farmers market. I'm pretty sure if you haven't been to our downtown farm market, it's one of the best in the country, and it's one of the largest in the country. But what we were real about was that there wasn't as much traffic of, it wasn't so much a racially diverse traffic coming through the downtown farmers market. And so we had a pilot where we really focused intentionally on Black and brown businesses have an opportunity to sell their goods or services or whatever it may be, products at the downtown farmers market. And so what started as an idea, a conversation, we got a couple sponsors. We end up having close to 40 businesses have that opportunity to experience being a part of the downtown farmers market last year, to where we then moved it and formalized it this year into an actual program. It's called Spark DSM now, our Minority Business Incubator Program. So these companies now, we were able to provide multiple weekends for them to be able to do, have that opportunity to sell at the market, but also now we give them opportunities to be a part of our World Food Music Festival, other events we have downtown. So setting them up for success, but exposure within that space. We just recently launched last year too, our first cohort, our Scale DSM, our Minority Business Accelerator Program, right? So some of it has been through our own actions that we have taken upon ourselves in programming. But then also I meet with and I come in and have conversations with the different board chairs of the chambers. One of my counterparts, she's over all the chamber affiliate relationships. So I come in and on an annual, if not even semi-annual basis, have this discussion with all the new chairs as they come in about diversity, equity, inclusion, and really making sure they understand the facts about diversity and inclusion versus the misconceptions and the misunderstandings. Because I can tell you right now, the word equity is confused with equality every day. And that in itself creates a situation when you start talking about it. That's why I always, within that presentation I give, I make sure I clearly highlight that, yes, and I get it, because if you think about it, equal was what most people remember from civil rights, the fight against separate but equal. So equal is that word that is in most people's minds when you start to talk about diversity and they think equal. So they're thinking equality because now you're talking about coming and taking something from me to make it equal distribution for everybody across the land, right? But we're talking about equity, where we're just talking about where everybody across the land has a fair chance to actually be successful and have the opportunity to build a quality life in America. because there's so many people I don't think to realize that where you're born, that zip code where you're born at now is almost predicting your future. Right now, the zip code you're born in predicts 60% of your health and your wealth. And I can't remember the exact percentage, but as far as how it predicts your wealth. But I'll just say this: if you're born in the poorest zip code, your chance to make it to middle class is still less than 10%. And that's a problem in the land of where we say we're the land of free and opportunity and such. So those are just some of the things that we do it by our own programming that we have. But then I have the opportunities. I go around and talk to our different affiliate chairs and boards and such. Whenever they invite me in, I'll come in and go to their breakfast meetings or lunch meetings and have these conversations again with folks. So some of it, again, is practicing what we preach and then just going out and still doing the preaching.
I got some other great questions. It's funny, Marvin, everybody has questions for you. They're excited about what you all are doing. So another great question I got is, how did you go about explaining like the percentage of effort and money that the partnership actually devotes to DEI? And when we think about it, and I kind of think, and me and you've talked about this before when we started 24/7 and the comparison between Evelyn K. Davis, and I kind of think some of the things that you're doing with the partnership, Grow Cedar Valley actually will be doing in our community, but it helps because how do we go around and rally up business support for some of the initiatives and the percentage of money that we want people to invest in that. So what are some of the initial conversations you had even to talk about like that kind of work?
So, it was some of those conversations I had when the position was created, right? I really stood on the fact, yes, I need my own budget, and it can't be just a by scale, but just something to kind of get me started budget. But I need to be able to go in and do programming if we need it to be, sponsoring folks if I can, but then also just having that dedicated staff member with me, right? That's a part of that budget, and so that investment, you have to have that conversation. And I've had it when I even go and talk to some of these other entities. If you're not putting money into diversity and inclusion in your budget on an annual basis, then you're not really doing anything to move the needle with diversity and inclusion. If it's not any money attached to it, then you're just still talking about it. You have no one dedicated to actually doing the work and intentionally moving the needle around diversity and inclusion. So yes, if you don't have dollars attached, you're still just thinking and talking about it. If you have money attached and you have staff dedicated to these initiatives on a regular basis, then we can have a conversation that yes, your journey is, you've launched past you've gotten off the starting point, you're out the gate, and we're ready to build from that. So I couldn't, right offhand, I can't tell you the percentage of what I have compared to the overall annual budget, but I knew I had to fight and make sure that even with the initial budget I have, I made it very clear that this may not be my final budget. As we grow and continue to do the work,
love it.
This budget may increase. Okay, so I laid down the foundation. So well, even after I'm in this role, whoever may come next, I always think about the next person. Even when I was at EKD, yeah. I don't think about what I have for me to be able to do and operate with, but I know if I come in, I'm gonna grow it. I'm gonna do what I need to do on my end. But what about the next person after me? What can I do to set them up for success so they can continue to thrive and not only do the work that I was doing, but build and be able to grow and take it to another level? And so if I'm not thinking about that now, even in this role, then I'm doing an injustice to the person who may be the second ever Chief Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Officer at the Greater Des Moines Partnership.
I love that. That is so true. The succession planning. Someone I was talking to recently, a mentor of mine, and they were talking about like from the time you start a role, you should be thinking about your succession plan, not because you're planning to lead, but if you're really trying to set things up to be sustainable, it's not doing so if it's just based off of you in that position. And so a part of being able to scale and making things that are going to be around is thinking about very early on what the next phase of that particular role can look like. So I absolutely love that. So with all the work and the practices that you do, and I don't know about you, like through my company, we do some DIB facilitation. I'm also chief, I have my CDE, so as well through the
Institute, through the
yes,
institute.
through
Yes.
the IDC, yeah, through
Yeah.
the Diversity and Inclusion Institute, and
Yes.
all the things that are available. So, that's my question, right? Like, so how do you really know if it's a person on day one? And I will share too. One Cedar Valley, we are launching our Equity at Work certification this fall. Kyle was on here, and so he's been amazing in helping us get started for that. And we're going to partner with other facilitators. So I'm hoping like some of my partners and people will actually be involved in actually going out to businesses and working with them on much like what you said. This is kind of where you're at, but as a company, this is where we see that you can grow to, and this is how to do it. How do you know, with all of the things that are available, how do you stay up to date on what's the best practices? And then again, that's that term, right? One of those catchphrases, best practices, but just what's available, how things are changing, what resources we should consider. How do you stay in that lane? And then after that, I'll open it up for questions.
So one of the things actually, so the Institute, so I need to finish taking, but I saw the CDE, the CDP, those folks that do the work to certified diversity executives, certified diversity professionals. They send me information. SHRM actually is a good resource. I just actually came back from Vegas from the SHRM conference, and so they also have a SHRM inclusion conference that's just specifically around inclusion that they created a few years ago. So you have the option of going to the larger SHRM conference and going through the DEI track, or you can go to the SHRM Inclusion Council, SHRM Inclusion Conference that they have separately now. So SHRM helps a lot. Me being a part of the chamber, we have this American Association of Certified Chamber Executives. So they have resources for diversity, equity, inclusion within that space that I stay abreast with as well. But I'll be honest with you too, LinkedIn will take you a long way too, as far as just knowing what's going on out there, because there's so many individuals that have their own companies now that are always out there looking for opportunities to do the work. LinkedIn, you can go and find articles from some DEI expert on a daily basis if you want to. You can follow them and sign up for their newsletters. So those are just some of the things I do. Honestly, some of it is just me been doing it so long and going through so much myself. I just know it's just something that's just there. So it's not, I don't need really new information, because all it is usually a lot of times now a rephrasing or a new term that based off of another term previously, and just repackaged and sent out a different way. So I mean, at the core of it, still it goes back to building the relationships.
That is so true, Marvin. I'm going to open it up for a few questions now. Chiquita, I know you had a question too, and she's our chair. And so I'm so glad that you mentioned that conference that SHRM does, because I would love to go. And our chair is here. Chiquita, did you want to go ahead and ask your question?
My question was, DEIB and social justice is being so weaponized, as you said. Do you foresee us having to, well, I'm at UNI, so
Right.
I'm already concerned about my position
Yes.
and my staff. So do you foresee us changing acronyms and utilizing other names to make sure we get the work done?
So we actually faced that. We had that conversation here, right, at the partnership. So I'm over diversity, equity, inclusion. My council is just called the Inclusion Council, and we had the Inclusion Summit, and we changed it. It used to be the Diversity and Inclusion Council. It used to be the Diversity and Inclusion Summit. And we had this conversation just recently. Do we need to change it back? Do we need to include all the acronyms? And we decided no. We can leave it as inclusion, but as we describe and talk about who we are through our about us kind of statements, we can address it and talk about it in there, to where we are highlighting diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, accessibility, and stay true to that. We know we have Joy talked about the veterans. I mean, we have identified our untapped talent communities. So, we have our 7 untapped talent communities, from veterans, persons with disabilities, returning citizens, African Americans, Latinx or Latino community, because that's the thing you got to know too. When you talk to different communities, what do they prefer being identified as too at the same time? Foreign born, and so and young people. So we have different things identified within that space. I understand with the recent situation that we have at the state, seeing how some states have passed banning DEI, like Florida and such. Unfortunately, it's probably going to come back and they'll probably try it again, right? But I will say, at least for like even our chamber was one of the first chambers to sign on and say no publicly against that. Because in Iowa, Florida may not feel the most immediate, but think about taking diversity, equity, inclusion out of universities the next time they try to bring this around next year. And then ask them, are you willing to not maybe see the Iowa Hawkeyes go 12-0 again? Are you maybe interested in seeing Iowa State Cyclones not making it to a bowl game again? I mean, when you start taking those things out of places like here in the Midwest, they're not thinking of the impact they have around recruiting for the very same sports that they want to go and watch on the weekends and enjoy, because that's going to impact those teams first and foremost when it comes to being successful and competing at those levels. And not even just about sports, just about just the diversity and the successes we have within these universities. One of my fraternity brothers was the first ever software engineer graduate at Iowa State, right? And he's doing well out in all the tech companies on the West Coast. But does he come as a Gates Millennium Scholar if diversity, equity, and inclusion is off the table? So those are the kind of examples you have to use when they start to say we're going to take diversity, equity, and inclusion from higher education. How valuable do you want these institutions to be in the future then? Because the business case already shows that the more you lean into diversity, equity, and inclusion, your return on investment is higher, your performance is higher. You're not at the back of the pack anymore, right? Even now with the looming recession they talk about, I go back to a stat in 2009, we were able to see that those companies that were the most diverse companies leaning into diversity and inclusion, then even in 2009, they outperformed all the other companies by four times during a recession. So those are the kind of things you have to just have these facts and data points to show people or make them think. Like when I talked about that recruiting, a lot of people don't think about it like that. They just so hard bent on saying we're going to get rid of this phrase. But do you really think about what you're going to get rid of and what you're really going to impact long term when you do that? So that's what I say, just making people think something different, just twisting it around enough to where, let me show you from my view and walking in my shoes just for a minute, right?
Yeah. So my thing is to I talked to the president yesterday, and my thing is I'm going to keep giving A+ quality to all of our students until something changes. And also been looking at a name like, excellence, achievement, and inclusion, working with those names just in case. But yeah, I'm retired Navy. So yeah, I'm a veteran as well. So I believe in fighting a good fight.
Mm-hmm. And congratulations on being a chair. I hadn't had a chance to meet you, but I saw you becoming a new chair for the One Cedar Valley. So congratulations on that as well.
Thank you for sharing that. And I know sometimes it's disheartening that we have to do those things, but I think, like you said, it's important that we continue like the why and not get caught up, because you can get caught up in like, and I've had this conversation with people like, well, we shouldn't have to do that or whatever. True, facts. But at the end of the day, do we want people to be able to take the message of what we're trying to give? Like, is it important that we're understood, or important that we just get to say what we want? Like, you know what I mean? You kind of have to balance that. And when we're talking about inclusion and we're talking about moving that needle, and especially around economics, people tend to listen that really more. They'll lean into that more if you can make it see where it will impact them, especially business people.
You said something there, Joy. I know we're getting close to the end of time, but Well, I've heard that argument before. We shouldn't have to say this anymore. We've been talking about this for a long time. Why should I have to be the one to say it? And my answer to that is, if not me, then who? I can't afford for this person to get any more misinformation. I need to make sure that they get the most immediate, exact conversation information they need to be successful, or at least inform their decision process in the manner it needs to be here and now. Because we're at that point in time in history again where we can't continue to let the misinformation machine move, because it just keeps pushing us backwards. So I take it upon myself, if I don't stand up and say something now and make myself available to have these conversations, then I can't say anything when that person is still uninformed, still basing it off of the wrong things, because I didn't have the time to have that conversation. But maybe I let somebody else. And unfortunately, in this space of diversity and inclusion, just because they say they're an expert and maybe doing sometimes they causing more harm than helping. And if I allow that person to be the one to have that conversation sometimes, and maybe not me, then we still may not have made the progress we needed to have. So I'm like, if I'm here and if it's my time, I always go back to my wife when she was out there. She always made the phrase in reference to what Coretta Scott King said after King's freedom speech. And it wasn't that, it was more the paraphrase it, but it's more to the freedom is never really won, right? It's a fight that every generation has to take upon themselves and keep fighting. And here we are. It's our generation's turn. Well, I actually got about 5 generations now in this fight, because this is one of the most diverse generational spaces we've been in a long time too, where you have 5 generations in the workforce. So you got to think about that. You've got a Gen Z all the way with a traditionalist. So you got somebody from 1900 all the way to 2023 potentially, all in the same kind of spaces and places. So you just have to be willing to talk still. Because if it's not you having that conversation, do you trust the next person to have the conversation you know it should be and how to have it? Just because you don't want to have the conversation again? We can't afford that. These next 50 years, I don't want this to become a problem again or recognized as an issue in another 50 years. We can't afford it. I don't think people really understand the dire straits we're in. We can't afford another 50 years to go by, and it's not something to be addressed. It has to still be most immediate. I was telling people from 2020, what are you prepared to do when the lights and cameras go away? Because they're going to go away. Like, there's a lot of action and movement right now because it's on TV, and people have to go back and rewind the tape. The civil rights movement didn't happen because everybody was just as persistent and kept fighting. That was great. But it really shifted when it was on TV and the world saw those police spraying and hosing them down, letting dogs loose on the folks during that time. It moved in even more because the world has saw it on TV. Same thing here in 2020 with George Floyd. The whole world saw it because everybody was home during the pandemic. Everybody had to watch it. You couldn't shake it. You didn't have an excuse. I was at work. I was taking the kids to the park. I was doing something different. I don't know what you're talking about. No, everybody saw it. But it's the same thing. Now that we're 3 years removed from it, it's not so much a part of the conversation as much. What are we prepared to do to keep it going? Because if it's not us keeping it going, who's going to do it?
I so agree. Well, Marvin, we're at 12:28. This has been a great conversation. And again, I can't wait to stay. I want to stay connected. I got 2 requests, and I know you're probably like, Joy, I'm tired of you. But so I would love for you to send us those One Economy reports that you talked about, so that I think I have them, but just to make sure I have the updated ones so that I can send out to people that follow us on the Economic Inclusion Network. And then also, I'm very interested in those list of priority areas that you said, because I even think about the narrative that we currently have for immigrants, whereas us in talent acquisition and workforce spaces, we know that some of the answer to our talent shortage is our immigrant population, right? And so how do we, again, like you said, stop letting misinformation go without actually having some information that really kind of is fact-based on this is really what the truth is. The truth is we need to be addressing that, because we know in Iowa, we've got a bunch of jobs that there aren't enough people. Our population isn't growing as quickly, right? And so some of that is the answer to fulfilling our workforce needs. And so those are some things that we need to be able to tell people. So I'm very interested in what for the region, for the partnership, what your workforce priorities are, and seeing if we have some alignment with One Cedar Valley.
I'll help you real quick, and I know we got to wrap it up. But like, just for example, that's one of the things we just were able to identify over the last decade. Des Moines has been the second fastest growing city in the country as far as foreign-born folks moving to the area. We have over 170 languages being spoken at Des Moines Public Schools.
Mhm.
So a lot of those things, those dynamics, we're highlighting and lifting that up to where we know this last decade alone, if we didn't have as many folks moving here, we'd have even more issues around our workforce here in the region right now. Okay, so that's just an example of where you gotta open this net, they gotta have a big tent for real.
Yeah, definitely. That when I heard that, I was just like, why isn't this something, when we talk about economic inclusion, this should be something that we should be talking about. The fact that there's this larger ideology that immigration is not good, yet we need people that are going to come, that are going to pay taxes, and that are going to contribute to our economy. And so I'm like, we need to have those conversations. So thank you, Marvin. Appreciate so much. I have a question for Marvin and I did not get to ask it, please just feel free to email it to me and I will send it to Marvin and send out follow-up information too. And again, thank you for everybody that attended. Next month, we're actually talking about second chance hiring, I believe, in July. I got Cam Middlebrook from Des Moines. I'm connecting with.
All right, I got you. I already know you got reform coming. I already know what's next.
Yeah, I am. Cameron Middlebrook with Reform, and then also American Family Insurance. They have a second chance hiring initiative that I think, again, one of those areas that we should focus on. You mentioned were returning citizens, right? And so I'm really just wanting us to be intentional and what are things that we can do to implement some of that across Iowa. So really, really excited about the next one. Yep, and I'm pulling all my favors from Marvin, from Cam, from everybody, so that you'll come talk to us about things that are happening across the state, and actually we can share things too, and like how can we really we know Iowa has the potential to be just a wonderful place for people to be and thrive, and so how do we make that happen? So thank you everybody for attending, and if you have any questions, again, feel free to reach out and hopefully see you next month.
All right.
Thank you, Marvin.
Thank you, Marvin. Take care.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
See you, everyone.
Marvin, I'll send you a copy of, let me stop recording.
Yeah.